Now, the latest from ITV News Meridian with Fred Dinage and Sangeeta Barbara.
Good evening, welcome to ITV News Meridian.
Tonight's headlines here in the south.
Let June the 23rd go down in our history as our Independence Day.
He's waited 25 years for this moment. Victory for Leave and Nigel Farage, and it all began in Eastleigh.
We're in Southampton with the city's sizable Polish community. What does the vote mean for them?
Your foreign holiday has just got more expensive as the pound falls sharply. How else will the vote affect you?
And the truckers who drive across Europe for a living. They tell us why Brexit is the right road for them. Good evening. It has been, by any standard, an extraordinary 24 hours at the end of a bitter, brutal, long referendum campaign.
Now the South has voted, along with the rest of the UK, to leave the European Union. 2.5 million people in this region cast their vote. Almost 53% favoured Brexit.
Just hours after the final result, the Prime Minister, David Cameron, conceded defeat and chose to step down.
I fought this campaign in the only way I know how, which is to say directly and passionately what I think and feel, head, heart and soul. I held nothing back. I was absolutely clear about my belief that Britain is stronger, safer and better off inside the European Union. And I made clear the referendum was about this and this alone, not the future of any single politician, including myself. But the British people have made a very clear decision to take a different path. And as such, I think the country requires fresh leadership to take it in this direction.
Well, a dark day for David Cameron and his political career, but a triumphant one for UKIP leader Nigel Farage, also the South East member of the European Parliament.
This will be a victory for real people, a victory for ordinary people, a victory for decent people. Let June the 23rd go down in our history as our Independence Day.
There were celebrations too for Boris Johnson, now the bookie's favourite to become the new Prime Minister.
We can find our voice in the world again. A voice that is commensurate with the 5th biggest economy on earth. Powerful, liberal, humane, an extraordinary force for good in the world.
Well, in a moment we'll be live from Downing Street, Cameron's constituency of Witney, and Thanet, UKIP's stronghold in the southeast. First though, with such a close result, how was the South split over one of the most important decisions of our lives? With more, Fred.
Well, Sangeeta, here's how the South voted. Red means leave, blues for remain. And as you can see, an overwhelming vote for Brexit. Voting was by council or local authority, and only 7 areas voted to remain. Now, the strongest vote to leave came from Gosport, where 64% wanted out of the EU. Almost 46,000 people in Gosport voted, almost 3/4 of the population. Arran in Sussex, Havant, Weymouth and Portland and the Isle of Wight also saw more than 60% voting to leave. Of the 7 remain areas in our region, the highest turnout overall was in Hart, the 3rd highest in the UK, with 83% of people voting. Brighton and Hove, East Hampshire, Horsham, Lewis, Mid Sussex and Winchester also voted to stay in. Sangeeta.
So what now for the South Coast? It's people and the economy. Andrew Pate has been out and about as the tide begins to turn.
On the quayside in Portsmouth, fishermen were jubilant. They've been leading the campaign to leave and woke early to hear the news.
just got a message on my phone, Brexit wins, 52-48. So brilliant, absolutely brilliant. I was up very early this morning to get the result. I was eager.
Fish market owner Eric McLeod has campaigned against the EU since the original 1975 referendum.
Well, I told Edward Heath at the time what to do, but he didn't listen to me. So there we go. We have now suffered for 45 years under EU regulations.
But for Agnes Franschak and her son Igor, it wasn't such a good morning.
It is a wow moment, isn't it? My goodness me.
They moved to Southampton from Poland 9 months ago. They fear today's vote will mean they may have to move again.
1 year in England, next year in next country. This is a little problem.
You would like to stay in England?
Yeah, I want to stay in England.
Many others who woke up to today's news say they're confused about what it means for them, such as Bengono Bazala, who moved to Bournemouth from France when she was 5.
My brother lives in France, my sisters live in England. What will that mean for our family? Will we then become the scenario of disbanded families that can't rejoin? What's the future? Nobody has any answers, and those are our worries.
Across Dorset, it was the Leave vote that came out on top, and some shoppers in Christchurch today were in celebratory mood.
Absolutely elated. We should have come out a long time ago. We voted in for the common market, and this isn't the common market.
Absolutely wonderful, the best decision you can, and if they do it right, you can again, for the first time for many a long time, put the great back in Britain.
But Winchester had voted to remain, and this morning the anger for some was clear.
Pretty disappointed with the British public. I mean, we've just woken up in 1706.
I'm saddened for England because I felt together we were stronger.
Overnight, the pound and share prices of British companies dropped, but Hampshire councillor and businessman Sean Woodward says he sees a bright future.
I think businesses, particularly small businesses like the one I run, they're going to feel unleashed. You know, the red tape that binds us up, the work we have to do, which isn't for our business, it's for the government and for the EU.
In Brighton, the vote was to remain.
I feel saddened that my friend who's come here, she's studying, she's an amazing person, is made to feel alienated by my country.
It just feels a bit like slapping my face, and I don't feel welcome here anymore.
On the Isle of Wight, over 50,000 voted Leave, the result delighting residents in Newport.
I think being in the EU is for rich people, and the immigration problem, of course.
I think England desperately needs to get its identity back, and fingers crossed it's going to be positive in the long run.
So the South has spoken, and a new era begins. Andrew Pate, ITV News.
Let's look in more detail on how the South voted.
Ada in West Sussex backed Leave, as did Arran with 62.5% of the vote. Basingstoke and Dean saw a 78% turnout, with 52% voting out. Bournemouth, Chichester, Christchurch and Crawley all wanted to leave, as did Dorset East.
The whole of Dorset voted to leave. North and West Dorset both had very high turnouts. In Hampshire, Eastleigh, Fareham, Gosport and Havant all voted out. And on the Isle of Wight, 50,000 people, almost 62%, also backed Leave.
The New Forest, Poole, Portsmouth, Purbeck and Rushmore all out. It was closely fought in Southampton, 53.8% voting Leave.
Test Valley, Weymouth and Portland, Wiltshire and Worthing also backed Leave.
Voting to remain, Brighton and Hove was the strongest vote by far, 68.6%. East Hampshire, Hart, Horsham, Lewis and Mid Sussex all wanting to stay in, as did 4 out of 5 people in Winchester.
Plenty still to come, but remember to look back at how the region voted, and for the implications of Brexit you can go online. Just go to itv.com/Meridian News 24 hours a day.
Well, now, Britain first joined Europe in the early 1970s, so if you are 45 or under, you'll have never known what it's like not to be part of the European Union. And that includes, of course, a fair proportion of our members of Parliament.
Well, our political correspondent Phil Hornby is in Downing Street for us now. So, Phil, where do we go from here? It is very much uncharted territory, isn't it?
It is, Sangeeta. Only one country's ever left the EU before, and that was Greenland. So nobody's quite sure what's going to happen. It's going to take time. That's what the Leave campaign said today. No need to rush things. It's going to be complicated. No need to rush because we don't know who's going to be the occupant of that building behind me. Mr Cameron's resigned. There will be a new Prime Minister. The bookies' favourites are Boris Johnson and Maidenhead MP Theresa May.
Phil, what about Mr Cameron's decision to stand down? Did that come as a complete shock?
Not really. I think if Leave won this referendum, it was inevitable that Mr Cameron would stand down. He could hardly be the man to lead the negotiations, having told us over the last few months it was all going to be a complete disaster. Just to let you know also, Jeremy Corbyn's in trouble tonight. Labour backbenchers have tabled a motion of no confidence in him. So the Tory leader and the Labour leader could both be victims of this referendum.
Phil, thanks for now.
Well, the decision and its consequences have particular significance, of course, in Witney, the soon-to-be former Prime Minister's constituency.
Well, our reporter Rachel Hepworth is live there for us. So we have to ask Rachel this evening what the reaction is among Mr Cameron's neighbours. Rachel, can you hear us?
Well, this part of Oxfordshire has always been Conservative heartland, but many Tories are asking themselves tonight what happened, what's happened to our party, to our country and our leader in the space of just 24 hours. The majority here voted in support of David Cameron in the referendum, but given the national picture, it's perhaps not a surprise here that he has chosen to resign. There's sadness, yes, but there's realism too.
I think he's been a good Prime Minister. He's also my local MP, and that's been a problem, that he's obviously occupied with other things. And there's a lot wrong in Witney.
He's a good man, but I don't think he's a strong Prime Minister.
I always thought he was a strong man. I don't know who on earth can replace him that can be to that sort of strength.
Well, the Camerons are very much a part of the community and spend a lot of time here. The big question now is going to be whether Mr Cameron decides to stay on as an MP at all after a new leader is elected. Will he want to sit quietly on the back benches while the country and his party go through what's likely to be a very turbulent period? Now, all questions which will be exercising him in the coming weeks.
Rachel Hepworth in Witney there.
Well, with airports in our region, half a dozen ports, trains directly to the capital and several major motorways, what will the impact be on travellers?
Well, today there were warnings that fuel and motor insurance will rise and it'll cost us more to travel abroad. Here's our transport correspondent, Mike Pearce.
Amid the chaos on southern trains this morning, for once a more pressing topic of conversation. On the 7:22 Brighton to London, many were in shock at the Brexit result.
Shocking and making plans to leave the UK, to be honest.
Overwhelming sad. I wanted to be part of Europe.
I suspect we're staying, aren't we?
No.
We're leaving.
52%.
Yes.
52%.
My vote counted.
Yeah. Well, here at Gatwick, one immediate concern is the exchange rate. The dollar and the euro have fallen, and that means there'll be less money going round for this year's summer holiday.
It will affect me going back to the States again, because it's going to be too expensive to go back over there.
Well, it's good for Americans. Their dollar goes further. It's bad for Brits.
So things will go up with holidays and stuff like that, yeah. But it's not going to stop me from going anywhere.
The vote will be a disappointment to all sections of the travel industry keen to stay in Europe, saying it's led to cheaper fares and making it easier to move around.
I think it's very difficult to say in the long term, but certainly I think in the short term, our message has to be one of reassurance today. You know, people are still going to be able to travel this year and next year, I think without any changes whatsoever.
I'm a Brit, but I live in France, and so as of today, I've no idea what the future's going to hold for us.
If we stayed in, you wouldn't know whether or not you're doing the right thing or not, so by trying it, you've got a chance, haven't you?
It's your decision and I respect the English decision.
With 8% of the dollar exchange rates overnight, some of the most immediate impact could be on the price of fuel. It's the American currency we use to buy our oil.
We are thinking that should the market continue in its current vein for the next 10 to 14 days, some fuel stations may increase the price of petrol by 2.25 pence, but that's still cheaper than this time last year.
What happens to border controls, duty-free, and what are the implications for people who own homes abroad? For many, it will be unsettling times. Mike Pearce, ITV News.
So that's what it could mean for travel, but what about the movement of freight, a massive industry in our region?
Well, John Ryle's been talking to haulage bosses and truckers.
With the Brexit victory freshly confirmed and shock news from the city still sinking in, Andrew Baxter unveiled his new trailer. The boss at this £30 million haulage depot, one of 11 connected to 28 hubs across the EU, says he believes the Leave vote will boost trade and prosperity.
Trying to create a European superstate, the issues that they've got within the Eurozone, those are not going to be things that are good for the European economy or the British economy or for economic stability. And therefore I believe that we have succeeded in distancing ourselves from that.
At this transport cafe off the M25, popular with truckers on European trade routes, Remain votes were thin on the ground.
Well, I voted to leave. The main reason was immigration.
I was just sick and tired of all the lies that were coming out, and I thought change is as good as the rest.
40 years we've been in, and they've done nothing to make themselves attractive to us.
Not very happy, really, because I think Europe's in trouble and we've just deserted them.
The Freight Transport Association represents hundreds of haulage companies, many of them based here in Kent, the gateway to Europe. It decided its stance should be neutral through the referendum campaign. So what's its view this morning?
We're moving from a time of certainty about how to move goods and distribute freight onto the continent of Europe into a period of some uncertainty. And the job for trade associations like the FTA is to stay in touch with the negotiations as they develop and influence them to ensure that the simpler trade procedures that we have at the moment continue as far as possible in any new regime that may exist.
Those negotiations expected to take 2 years at least. Not until then will the haulage industry know the shape of the road ahead. John Ryle, ITV News.
Well, our reporter Derek Johnson is in Margate in Thanet for us. And Derek, just over a year ago, of course, Nigel Farage failed in that part of the world in his bid to become an MP. Quite a turnaround, isn't it?
Extraordinary turnaround for Nigel Farage. A year ago near here, I saw him give his resignation speech. We wished him farewell and thought that was the end of his political career. A year or so later, he's very much a winner, not an MP, but leading the party that always called for Britain to leave the EU. We spoke to people in Ramsgate, which is in the constituency Nigel Farage fought for last year. You happy? Still rolling? Yeah.
Derek Johnson, thank you.
Well, reaction now from university political expert Professor Jerry Stoker. Professor Stoker, thank you for being with us. What an extraordinary 24 hours. Leave it is, and a new Prime Minister eventually. Are you surprised?
Not surprised. I think the opinion polls were a little bit mixed in terms of their messages, but I think on the whole, a lot of us thought that really Leave was about to win when we looked at the opinion polls last week, and that's the way it turned out.
And a new Prime Minister?
Yes, I think that, again, that seemed to be the obvious thing, that the Prime Minister had tried so hard to win the referendum. If you lose it, I think it is now down to the people who argued for Leave to try and deliver on what it is they promised, and I think that will be very hard for them indeed.
Where did it go wrong for the Remain camp, do you think?
I think calling a referendum is always a risk for any political party or any political actor, because people vote on all kinds of different issues. I think that there was quite a strong element of anti-politics. There were lots of other grievances that people had about jobs, about immigration, which also, I think, played to the Leave cause as well. So, in some ways, I think that the difficulty is if you call a referendum, people vote on a whole range of different things, and they perhaps bring up their resentments against the ruling establishment.
going to take 2 years at least to leave the European Union. Is it going to work? How's it going to work?
Well, I think the honest answer is no one really knows. It is likely to be very complex and very messy. And I think that, again, it will be a big struggle for those that backed leave to actually deliver anything like the degree of control that they were promising.
Will the Conservatives ever recover from this?
In a funny sort of way, I actually think the Conservatives actually can come together quite easily in the sense that they had a party that was fairly evenly divided. They lost one half, the other half won. I think they can come back together. I think it's the Labour Party that's actually going to struggle more. In a word, who'll be the new Prime Minister? My best guess is probably Boris.
You think so?
Yes.
Professor Stoker, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Well, it's been an interesting day on our Facebook page, a war of words between the Leave and Remain voters.
Yeah, sadly, friends, it seems no longer friends. Twitter to a frenzy of comments. Over to our newsroom and Emma Wilkinson. Emma.
Yes, well, this has been a long and passionate campaign, and that's certainly been reflected on social media. The number of tweets about the referendum has steadily increased over recent weeks, but when the result came through, social media erupted. On Facebook, Lynn Hall from Whitchurch said, "The British people are braver and stronger than I thought. I'm feeling very proud to be British today." But Helen Joseph said, "I hope we don't live to regret this decision for the sake of my grandchildren. David Cameron would have been wrong in some people's eyes no matter what decision he'd made." So we asked if the way you'd voted had damaged any of your relationships. Thankfully, most of you said no. But Gemma Gardner said, "Yes, I regret it, but only because I've lost 2 friends over it." And spare a thought for this household in East Sussex. "I'm in," says one placard. The other sign, "Richard is out, happy home, not." And that really gives some sense as to how divided the public is on this issue.
Oh dear. Emma, thank you.
Well, it's fair to say the European Union was stunned by the referendum result, and EU leaders have tonight called for the UK to begin the process of leaving as soon as possible. They also warned there would be no renegotiation. Well, our reporter David Wood is at the European Parliament in Brussels tonight. David, so the EU wants to get on with Brexit.
Very much so, and they want to get on with being a European Union of 27 member states rather than 28 as it was yesterday. They were hopeful that the UK would remain last night. That was the strength of feeling here, but obviously they woke up to a completely different story. They want to modernise this place, and they believe the will of the people, as they call it, of Britain has been shown, and it's now time for us to move on, and they can get on with being a union of 27 states.
So, David, what does happen now?
Well, David Cameron is expected out here on Tuesday. If he were to say that how we have voted, well, that would trigger Article 50, the 2-year process for us to leave the Union. But he's already said that actually he wants his successor as Prime Minister to deal with those negotiations. So if he doesn't say it, the next possibility that someone can say it is September. If the new PM isn't in place by then it's 3 months later. So it could take some time, but we know when it's triggered, it will take at least 2 years.
David Wood in Brussels, thank you very much.
OK, let's return now to Downing Street and our political editor, Phil Hornby. Phil, despite Boris Johnson's involvement in all this, of course, it's UKIP's Nigel Farage who started the anti-EU ball rolling, isn't it?
It is, Fred, and love him or loathe him, I think you've got to accept that Nigel Farage has had a profound and amazing impact on politics in this country. Indeed, he is one of the most influential politicians in recent decades. This referendum would not have happened without him. And in fact, today is the tale of 2 men, one of whom lives in the building behind me, both from the Meridian region. In 2010, as David Cameron became Prime Minister, Nigel Farage was nearly killed in an election day plane crash in Buckinghamshire. As one political career reached the top, another one seemed to be over. Mr Farage first stood at a by-election in Eastleigh in 1994, UKIP's first ever election. He only just beat the monster raving Looney Party. But in 1999 he made his breakthrough, one of 3 UKIPers elected to the European Parliament, representing the South East.
You're not going to fall in love with the place and go native, are you?
I don't think so, no. As he began causing trouble in Brussels, David Cameron began looking for a safe Tory seat, rejected for Ashford in Kent, then selected for Witney in Oxfordshire. The Tory leader, Folkestone's Michael Howard, spotted a rising star and quickly promoted him. Meanwhile, Nigel Farage was trying time and again to get into the Commons. In all, he stood 7 times and always lost. But UKIP was starting to surge in the polls, and that alarmed David Cameron. There were fears UKIP would take Tory seats at the 2015 election. There were rumours Tory MPs were about to defect, which is why Mr Cameron took the fateful decision to promise the EU referendum, a promise he'd only have to keep if he won an outright majority last May, and even he didn't think he would. There's no love lost between the two men. Mr Farage says he can't forgive Mr Cameron for calling UKIP supporters fruitcakes and closet racists. They both appeared on the first special ITV referendum programme, but separately. Mr Cameron wouldn't argue face-to-face with the enemy.
And I will do everything I can in future to help this great country succeed.
And today their career paths cross again. This time it's Nigel Farage who's on top of the world, and it's Mr Cameron whose career is over.
Phil, quite a momentous day in every sense of the word, and of course you've met and you've known and you've interviewed all the key players, Nigel Farage, David Cameron, Boris Johnson. From your point of view, the most dramatic day you've ever seen in politics?
Yeah, no doubt about it. If you just think what's happened in the last 24 hours, the UK is out of the European Union. The Prime Minister has resigned. There are rumours that the Labour leader might be in trouble. The Scottish First Minister says there might be another referendum for independence in Scotland. All of these are monumental events, and for them all to happen on the same day, it is quite extraordinary. There are some political correspondents who've been here longer than me, with even whiter hair than me. None of them can remember a day quite like it.
Amazing. Phil, lovely as always, thanks for talking to us.
Well, the winds have changed.
Certainly. And talking of winds and change, what about the weather? Is that going to change? Is that going to get better? Most important, unlike politics, is it going to be settled? Let's find out. Helen Plint.
From blizzards to pool, driving through Europe. Eurotunnel the Shuttle sponsors ITV Meridian weather.
Hello again. The storm clouds of yesterday clearing today to leave much calmer skies overhead. This was the beautiful scene in Marchwood taken by Harry Roach, and we do still have some sunshine around through the first part of the weekend. That said, it'll feel that little bit fresher. We lose the humidity of late with rain or showers later on both days to enjoy the morning. So this is the weather system we have to thank. High pressure nudging towards us on Saturday, dragging in that westerly airflow and bringing those unsettled conditions well into the first part of next week. For the time being, though, continuing to dry out this evening, so the showers fizzling away, clear skies to the east, and temperatures between 12 or 14 degrees for lots of us. But head into the country, it'll be that little bit cooler, maybe struggling to reach double figures, and quite a departure from where we've been of late. So we lose the muggy, stuffy feel, although it is a fairly bright start tomorrow morning. That said, between the sunshine, we'll be peppered by those showers pretty early on, becoming heavy, potentially thundery into the afternoon, and more widespread than today. Still some brightness between, though, with highs of 20 degrees. Now I'll leave you with a quick look at the high tide times. And in Bournemouth, tomorrow's high tide just after midnight, and again just before 1:20 in the afternoon.
Eurotunnel the Shuttle sponsors ITV Meridian weather.
Keeping a close eye on summer. The Pollen Count, sponsored by Ilogy Eye Drops.
So in a similar vein to the weather, the pollen levels are also ducking and diving around the place over the next few days. Tomorrow's showers hampering them somewhat, but as you can see, by the end of the weekend, pollen levels are very high once again.
Well, a momentous day today for the country. This the view as the sun rose this morning over the white cliffs of Dover, as families woke up to a new political dawn, a new landscape and a vote to leave the European Union.
Well, in the Meridian region, 52% wanted out, 48% wanted in, just like the national picture.
And in a moment we have the ITV Evening News with Mark Austin and Mary Nightingale.
Stacey Pool's got our late news, but for now, from the team here at ITV Meridian, thank you very much indeed for watching. Have a peaceful weekend from all of us here.
Bye-bye. See you Monday.